I was living by myself in a little rental house outside Portland, Oregon. It wasn't a nice house or anything. It was actually pretty old, but the rent was cheap, and honestly, that's all I cared about at the time. I worked at a warehouse about 40 minutes away, so my routine was pretty much the same every day. I'd get up around 6:30, leave for work, come home around 6 or 7, make something to eat, watch TV for a while, and go to bed. The neighborhood was quiet. There were a lot of older houses around me, and most of the people who lived there had been there for years. I didn't really know any of them beyond saying hi when I saw them outside. The house had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small garage, and an attic. The attic was the only part of the house I never really used. There wasn't even a proper staircase going up there. There was one of those pull-down ladders in the hallway ceiling, and I had to use a chair to reach it. The previous tenant had apparently left a bunch of boxes up there, and the landlord told me I could just leave them alone. So I did. For the first few months, nothing happened. Then one Monday, I came home from work and noticed that one of the kitchen cabinets was open. It was one of those things that you don't even really think about. I figured I'd left it open that morning. I made dinner and forgot about it. A few days later, I noticed the bathroom light was on when I got home. Again, I didn't think much of it. I was pretty tired most nights, and I knew I wasn't exactly the most organized person. Then I noticed my cereal was gone. This sounds stupid, but I remember being genuinely confused by it. I had bought a box of cereal that weekend, and I hadn't eaten any of it. I checked the kitchen cabinets. Nothing. I checked the trash. Nothing. I eventually figured I must have eaten it without remembering. That sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, I didn't have any reason to think somebody else had been inside my house. Then the little thing started happening more often. I'd come home and find a kitchen drawer slightly open. Sometimes the bathroom cabinet would be open. Once, I found one of my dining room chairs pulled away from the table. I lived alone, and I knew I hadn't done those things. But every single time, there was some explanation I could come up with. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe the cat from the neighbor's house had somehow gotten inside. I kept making excuses for it, until one night, I came home and immediately noticed that my bedroom window was open. It was freezing outside. I had definitely closed it before leaving. I walked over and checked the lock. It wasn't broken. It was still locked. That really bothered me. I closed the window and stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out how it could have opened. I ended up telling myself the wind must have somehow pushed it. That wasn't really possible, but I didn't want to think about anything else. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, before I left for work, I decided to put my old phone in the bedroom. I downloaded one of those motion detection apps and pointed the camera toward the door. I wasn't expecting to catch anybody. Honestly, I thought I was probably being paranoid. I went to work. When I came home that night, the phone hadn't recorded anything. Nothing, so I actually felt relieved. I laughed at myself and deleted the app. Then I went upstairs to grab some clothes. That's when I noticed the attic door was open. I stopped at the bottom of the ladder. I had never opened it. I knew that for a fact. I hadn't been in the attic since moving in. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and climbed up. The attic smelled awful. It was that old, dusty smell you get in houses that haven't been opened in years. I pointed the flashlight around. There were boxes everywhere. Old Christmas decorations, a broken lamp, some pieces of furniture. Then my flashlight landed on something that definitely shouldn't have been there. A blanket. It was folded in the corner, and next to it was a pillow. There was also an empty water bottle. I just stood there. I remember actually thinking, okay, somebody's been up here. I climbed down and called the police. 2 officers came over. They searched the house and the attic. They didn't find anyone. One of them asked me if I had given anyone a spare key. I said no. They checked the windows and doors. Nothing looked forced. Then one officer noticed something I hadn't. There was a small opening behind some boxes in the attic. He moved them aside. Behind them was a narrow crawl space. It ran between the walls. He shined his flashlight inside. Then he looked back at me. There were footprints in the dust. Fresh footprints. They went deeper into the crawl space. The officer called another unit. They searched the entire space. About 10 minutes later, they found an old sleeping bag. There were food wrappers, bottles of water, a flashlight, and a small notebook. The notebook was what really scared me. It wasn't random writing. It was my schedule. There were dates, times, notes about when I left for work, when I came home, when I went grocery shopping. One page said, leaves around 6:50, Another said, usually home by 6. There were even notes about when I had friends over. I felt sick. Someone had been watching me. Someone had been living inside my house. And I had been sleeping downstairs while they were probably sitting a few feet above me. The police took everything. They asked me if I recognized any of the handwriting. I didn't. They asked if I had any enemies. I almost laughed. I was 23. I worked at a warehouse. I barely talked to anybody outside of work. I couldn't think of a single person who would do something like this. The landlord came over the next morning. When I showed him the crawl space, he looked genuinely shocked. He said he didn't even know it existed. Apparently, the house had been remodeled decades earlier, and that part of the wall had been sealed off. The police believed whoever had been staying there had probably discovered the crawl space from outside and figured out a way to get inside. They also thought the person had been entering the house when I was gone. That explained everything. The open cabinets, the missing food, the lights, the window, all of it. But there was one thing they couldn't explain. The final page of the notebook. There was only one sentence written on it. I remember it because the officer showed it to me before taking the notebook away. It said, "He knows about the attic now." I moved out 3 days later. I didn't even bother getting the rest of my deposit back. I just wanted to leave. The police never found the person. I don't know if they ever figured out who he was. And honestly, I don't want to know. But every once in a while, I'll think about that house. I'll think about how many nights I slept there completely unaware. And the part that still bothers me the most isn't that someone was hiding in my house. It's that I spent months thinking all those little things were just me being forgetful. So if you ever live alone and start noticing small things changing around your house, don't automatically assume you're imagining it. Check your attic, check your crawl space, and maybe just once, check the places you never think to look. This happened about 5 years ago when I was living in Northern California. I was 24 at the time, and I had a pretty boring life. I worked at an auto parts store during the week, and on weekends I'd usually drive somewhere just to get out of the house. One Friday night, I drove about 2 hours to visit an old friend. We stayed up pretty late talking, and by the time I finally decided to head home, it was almost midnight. My friend actually told me I should just sleep at his place. I remember him saying, "Dude, it's almost 12, just leave in the morning." But I had work the next day. Not early, thankfully, but early enough that I didn't want to wake up and drive home in the morning. So I left. The first hour of the drive was completely normal. There were still plenty of cars on the highway, some trucks, people heading home from work, that kind of thing. But eventually I got onto a smaller highway that cut through a heavily forested area. That's where everything changed. There weren't many streetlights anymore. There weren't really any buildings. Just trees, road, and the occasional car coming in the opposite direction. I had the radio playing quietly, and I was mostly just thinking about getting home. Then I noticed a black pickup truck behind me. It was an older model. I couldn't tell exactly what year it was, but it looked like one of those big American trucks from the early 2000s. It wasn't doing anything strange. It was just behind me, so I didn't think about it. I drove for another 10 minutes. The truck was still there. I changed lanes. It changed lanes too. Again, nothing unusual. Then I slowed down because I was coming up on a slower vehicle. The truck slowed down. I passed the vehicle. The truck passed it too. At that point I started paying attention. Not because I thought I was being followed, just because I'd noticed the truck. There were almost no other cars around us anymore. And I started wondering how long we'd been traveling together. Maybe another 15 minutes went by. The truck was still behind me. Same distance. Same position. I decided to test something. I sped up. Not crazy fast. I just went about 10 miles over the speed limit. The truck sped up too. I slowed back down. So did the truck. I remember looking at my rearview mirror and thinking, okay, that's weird. But even then I wasn't scared. I figured maybe the driver was heading in the same direction. It happens. Then I took an exit I normally wouldn't take. There was a small gas station about a mile down the road. I figured I'd get some coffee and let the truck pass. I pulled into the gas station. The black pickup followed me. That was the first moment I genuinely felt uncomfortable. I parked directly under the brightest light I could find. The truck parked on the opposite side of the lot. Its headlights were still on. I sat there for a minute. Nobody got out. I looked at the driver's window. I couldn't see anyone inside. The windows were tinted pretty dark. I decided to go inside. The gas station was almost empty. I bought a bottle of water and a coffee. Then I stood near the window pretending to look at my phone. I was actually watching the truck. It hadn't moved. After about 5 minutes, the truck finally pulled out. I watched it disappear onto the highway. I felt relieved. I waited another couple of minutes before leaving. When I got back onto the road, everything seemed normal again. I drove for about 15 minutes. No truck. 20 minutes. Nothing. I actually laughed to myself. I thought I'd just been paranoid. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. There it was. Same black pickup. I remember my stomach dropping. I immediately called my friend. He answered half asleep. I told him what was happening. He asked me if I knew the truck. I said no. He told me to drive to the nearest police station, so I pulled up the nearest one on my GPS. It was about 20 minutes away. I stayed on the phone with him the entire time. The truck stayed behind me. At one point, I turned onto another road. The truck followed. I turned again. It followed. I started getting genuinely scared. Then something strange happened. The truck suddenly turned off the road. I watched it disappear down a side street. I kept driving. For the first time that night, I couldn't see it anywhere. I thought maybe I'd finally lost it. I reached the police station a few minutes later. The parking lot was almost empty. I pulled in and sat there for about 10 minutes. I didn't even get out. I just sat in my car and tried to calm down. Eventually, I decided I was being ridiculous. Maybe the driver really was just going the same way. Maybe he lived somewhere near me. Maybe the turns were just a coincidence. So I started driving home. My house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was around 3 a.m. when I finally arrived. I pulled into my driveway. The street was completely empty. No cars, no pedestrians, nothing. I turned off my engine and sat there for a moment. Then I got out. I locked the car and walked inside. Everything looked normal. I turned on the kitchen light, made myself some water. Then I went into the living room. That's when I looked through the front window and saw the truck. It was parked across the street. My heart immediately started pounding. Same black pickup, same shape, same dark windows. I hadn't heard it pull up. I hadn't seen it pass me. It was just there. I grabbed my phone and called the police. While I was talking to the dispatcher, I kept watching the truck. Then the headlights turned on. The truck slowly pulled away. I gave the dispatcher the license plate as best as I could. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They drove around the neighborhood. Nothing. The truck was gone. They asked me if I had any idea who might be following me. I told them I didn't. They checked the street and looked around my house. Nothing seemed damaged. Nothing was missing. Eventually they left. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I installed a couple of security cameras outside my house. I also started parking my car in the garage. For the next 2 weeks nothing happened. No truck. No strange calls. No weird activity. I started thinking maybe it really had been nothing. Then one morning I checked the security camera recordings. I don't know why I checked them. I was bored. Maybe I was still curious. I went through the footage from the previous night. At around 3:12 a.m., the black pickup appeared. It was parked across the street. I watched it for several minutes. It didn't move. Then I noticed something. There was no footage of it arriving. I checked the previous 30 minutes. Nothing. The street was empty. Then suddenly the truck was there. It was like the camera had simply started recording after the truck had already appeared. I checked my second camera. That camera faced the opposite direction. Same thing. No truck arriving. No headlights. Nothing. Just the truck sitting there. I started looking at the camera angles, and that's when I noticed something. There was a large tree directly between the street and my house. The tree created a blind spot. Anyone standing behind it couldn't be seen by either camera. I don't know if that was intentional. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but I didn't like it. I called the police again. An officer came over and looked at the footage. He didn't have much to say. He basically told me that there wasn't enough evidence to prove someone was targeting me, but he did give me some advice. He told me not to confront the driver, and he told me to call immediately if the truck came back. It never did, at least not that I know of. I moved about a month later. I didn't move because of the truck specifically. There were other reasons, but I'll admit, the truck played a part. I haven't seen it since, but there's one thing I still think about. A few months after moving, I was driving through another town late at night. I stopped at a red light, and I saw an old black pickup sitting across the intersection. Same shape, same dark windows. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The light turned green. I drove away. The truck didn't follow. It probably wasn't even the same truck. I know that. There are thousands of black pickup trucks on American roads. It could have been anybody. But I still checked my rearview mirror about 10 times before I got home. And even now, whenever I'm driving alone late at night and I see the same vehicle behind me for too long, I don't wait around to find out why. I take the next exit, because maybe the driver is completely innocent. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but after you've had one car follow you for 40 miles, you stop trusting coincidences. This happened about 6 years ago when I was working the overnight shift at a gas station in Ohio. I was 24 at the time and had been working there for maybe 8 months. It wasn't exactly a great job, but it was easy. The station was open 24 hours, and I usually worked from midnight until 8 in the morning. Most nights were incredibly boring. I'd clean the coffee machines, restock the shelves, check the bathrooms every couple of hours, and mostly just sit behind the register watching whatever was on my phone. The gas station was on the edge of town, right off a highway. There were a few houses nearby, but once you got past the station, there wasn't much. Just woods and farmland. During the day, it was a normal place. At night, it felt completely different, especially around 2 or 3 in the morning. There were long periods when nobody came in at all. I actually got used to it. One night, it was raining pretty hard. Not a storm exactly, but steady rain that had been coming down for hours. I remember because the parking lot was almost completely empty. The rain made everything outside look blurry through the front windows. I was sitting behind the register around 2:15 a.m. when the store phone rang. We had an old landline behind the counter. I picked it up without really thinking. "Thank you for calling." A man interrupted me. "Is the back door locked?" I stopped. For a second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. I said, "What?" He repeated himself. "Is the back door locked?" His voice wasn't threatening. That's what made it weird. He sounded completely calm. I looked toward the back of the store. The employee entrance was probably 20 feet behind me. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer. The call ended. I stared at the phone for a few seconds. Then I laughed. I figured it was some idiot messing with me. I put the phone down and went back to what I was doing. But about 30 seconds later, I got up and checked the back door anyway. It was locked. I pulled on the handle twice. Locked. I walked back to the register. Nothing happened for the next 10 minutes. Then the phone rang again. "Same number," I answered. The same man said, "Check it again." I didn't say anything. I walked toward the back. This time, I stopped halfway there. Something about the call bothered me. I checked the door. Still locked. I came back to the register. "Who is this?" There was silence. Then he said, "Don't turn around." I froze. I don't know why. I knew there was nobody behind me. I had a clear view of most of the store, but hearing those words made my entire body tense up. I slowly looked at the security monitors. We had 8 cameras. The parking lot, the gas pumps, the front entrance, the aisles, the back hallway. Everything looked normal. I picked up the phone again. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. Then he said, "Camera 4. The call ended. I looked at the monitor labeled Camera 4. It showed the storage room. The room was small. There were boxes of soda, cleaning supplies, paper towels, and a few shelves. Nothing moved. Nobody was there. I grabbed the store phone again and called my manager. He answered after a few rings. I told him what happened. He laughed at first. He thought it was probably a customer messing around. Then I told him the guy knew about the cameras. That changed his tone. He told me to lock the front doors. I did. Then he told me to stay behind the counter and call the police if I heard anything. I remember asking him if he wanted me to leave. He said absolutely not. He told me to stay inside because it was raining and there was nobody around. So I sat there. The rain kept hitting the windows. The pumps outside were completely empty. I kept watching the security monitors. Nothing. About 15 minutes passed. Then I heard something. It was faint. A metallic sound, like somebody had dropped something in the storage room. I looked at camera 4. Nothing. I turned up the volume on the security monitor. We had microphones connected to some of the cameras. All I could hear was static and the rain outside. Then I heard it again. A small scraping sound. I stood up. I took the flashlight we kept under the counter. I started walking toward the storage room. I don't know why I did that. Looking back, it was probably the dumbest thing I could have done. But at the time, I wanted to prove to myself that there was nobody there. I reached the door. I stood there for a few seconds. Then I opened it. Nothing, just boxes. I checked behind the shelves. Nothing. I checked the small employee bathroom. Empty. I came back out. I locked the storage room. Then I noticed something. One of the back windows was slightly open. Not enough for someone to climb through easily. maybe 2 inches, but I knew I hadn't opened it. I closed it and locked it. Then I called my manager again. He told me to call the police. I did. While I was waiting, the phone rang. I didn't want to answer. I just stared at it. It rang 4 times, then stopped. A few seconds later, my personal phone started ringing. Unknown number. I picked it up. The same voice said, "He's behind you." I turned around so quickly that I nearly dropped the phone. Nobody was there. The store was empty. I looked at the front door. Locked. I checked the security monitors. Nothing. Then the man said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "You shouldn't have locked the back door." Then he hung up. I immediately stepped away from the counter. I went into the office and locked the door. The office was tiny. There was a desk, a computer, and another security monitor. I could see the entire store from there. I called 911. I told the dispatcher someone might be inside the gas station. She asked if I could see anyone. I said no. She told me to stay in the locked room until officers arrived. I sat there listening. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps, very faint, from the store. Slow footsteps, 1 step, then another, then another. I couldn't see anyone on the camera, but I could hear them. The footsteps stopped near the office door. I stopped breathing. There was silence, then 3 quiet knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. The person outside didn't say anything. Another few seconds passed. Then the footsteps moved away. I watched the monitor. Nothing. A minute later, I heard the front door open, then close, then nothing. The police arrived about 3 minutes later. I heard them calling out from the store. I waited until they reached the office. When I opened the door, there were 2 officers standing outside. They searched the entire building. Nobody was there, but one officer found something near the back entrance. The lock had fresh scratches around it. He looked at me and asked if anyone had tried to open the door. I told him no. He said somebody had probably been trying to pick the lock. They checked the window too. There were marks around the frame. Someone had been trying to get inside. The officers searched outside. They found footprints in the mud behind the building. The rain had washed most of them away, but there was still enough to tell that somebody had been there recently. They followed the footprints toward the woods. After about 50 yards, they disappeared. The police never found the person. I didn't work that shift again. Actually, I quit 2 weeks later. I found another job. I thought that was the end of it. Then, about 4 months later, I got a call from my old manager. He asked if I remembered the strange phone calls. I said yes. He went quiet for a second. Then he said, "It happened again." Apparently, the new overnight employee had gotten a call around 2 in the morning. Same question. "Is the back door locked?" The employee hung up. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. The caller said, "Check camera 4." My manager told me the employee called the police immediately. They searched the building. Nobody was found. But they discovered the same thing. The back door had fresh scratches around the lock. After that, the company replaced all the locks and installed additional cameras. I never found out who the man was. I don't know how he knew about the cameras. I don't know how he knew someone was working inside. And I definitely don't know how he got close enough to the back door without being seen. But there's one thing I've always wondered about. That first night, when he asked me if the back door was locked, maybe he wasn't asking because he wanted to get inside. Maybe he already was. Maybe he just wanted to know if I had noticed. And honestly, that's the part that still bothers me. Because if he was already inside that building, then those footsteps I heard outside the office door weren't coming from someone trying to break in. They were coming from someone who had already gotten in. And I was sitting alone in that little office, just waiting for him to decide what he wanted to do.